Good afternoon, everyone, and we will start the webinar in 1 minute. And so don't worry if you haven't heard anything to this moment. We're going to start shortly. Thank you. Right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you and welcome to this webinar, Dirty Fuel, an analysis of official and unofficial petroleum products in the Niger Delta. It's fantastic to have so many people on the call. I'm sure we'll get a few more coming in as we go as well. Just to let you know, we are recording this webinar and we're planning to upload it to YouTube, so you'll be able to see it again, and also those that haven't been able to join will be able to see it. My name's Calvin Lane. I'm Programs Director at SDN. The purpose of today's webinar is to share the findings of our recent research with you on the quality of unofficial and official fuel available in the Niger Delta, and the impact of the consumption of this fuel on emissions, and therefore the impact on air quality and associated health issues. Before we go any further, a quick point on definitions. When we say unofficial petroleum products in the Niger Delta, we're talking about products that have been refined locally in makeshift refineries using stolen crude oil. Whereas with official products, we're talking about those that are largely imported into Nigeria, although Nigeria does have some official local refining capacity as well. What we are going to tell you today is that our findings have shown that official and unofficial petroleum products are both of low quality in the Niger Delta, but strikingly, often official products have some worse characteristics than unofficial products. And this is quite shocking, considering that Nigeria exports an extremely high grade of crude oil, sweet crude, which is low in sulfur. In return, it appears from our findings that it's receiving quite dirty fuel in return. This, we believe, the consumption of these high sulfur dirty fuels is likely to be a major contributor to air pollution, and then to associated severe health impacts, respiratory disease, cancers, and so on. And that's all the more, it's important at any time, but perhaps even more important now at a time where we're all concerned about COVID-19, and initial research seems to suggest that high levels of air pollution may be linked with increased mortality related to COVID-19. So while we'll be talking mainly about the Niger Delta, this is relevant more widely to Nigeria, because those products that are being sold in the Niger Delta are likely to be sold elsewhere. Quickly on the agenda for today. We'll quickly do an introduction, at which point I'll hand over to my colleague, Alexander Cyril, Research and Policy Officer at SDN, who will talk through the methodology, key findings, emissions modelling, health impacts, and our conclusion and recommendations from the research. That'll probably take us about 20 minutes, maximum 30 minutes, and the rest of the time, and we've set an hour, is for question and answers, and we will be happy to stay on the line for longer, if we still have questions coming in. And we have got a lot of people on the call, so apologies in advance if we can't answer everyone's questions today, but we will try to do that, and we'll encourage you to contact us after the webinar if we haven't been able to answer your questions. So quickly, many of you will already be familiar with SDN, Stakeholder Democracy Network. We're a non-governmental organisation, and our office is based in Port Harcourt in Rivers State in the Niger Delta. I'm personally based in our London office in the UK. We've been working in the Niger Delta for over 15 years with those affected by the extractors industry and wider issues of weak governance. We undertook this research with Noctis, in partnership with them, a London-based organisation that supported us with interpretation and analysis of lab results, emissions modelling and report writing. And just to convey our thanks to the UK government's Conflict, Security and Stability Fund that supported this work, and to note, of course, that our findings and analysis do not necessarily represent their views. So very quickly on taking part today, if you do drop off the call at any point and have connectivity issues, when you rejoin, if you can't hear anything, try clicking the join audio button, which you can see down the bottom left here, and you should be able to hear us again. And we have the chat box available to take your questions and comments, so please do use that. And you can use that whilst we're doing the presentation, but then I'll be sifting through that to make sure we can answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the presentation. So before I hand it over to Alex, why did we do this research? Many of you may be aware that there's been a severe problem of soot in Port Harcourt for a number of years now. It's especially, well, visually severe during the dry season. And there's been lots of discussion about what the cause of this may be. Often the artisanal oil industry has been pointed at as a potential cause. And certainly, you know, our own research at SDN has suggested that the artisanal industry has grown, its organization and sophistication has grown. So it certainly seems possible that this may be a cause of the soot, which led us to do this research and to go out and sample sources of unofficial fuel to see whether this might tell us something about what's causing the soot problem in Port Harcourt. But what we found when we did this research was that we took some control samples of unofficial fuel alongside of official fuel alongside the unofficial fuel, and we found some slightly concerning results in the official fuel, which led us to expand this research and to look at both official and unofficial fuel quality in the Niger Delta. And you know, what we found in the official fuel would very much align with other studies out there, such as Public Eye's Dirty Diesel, which suggests that low-grade, high sulfur refined products are being sold into the West African market. So without further ado, I will hand over to Alex, who will take you through the research. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Calvin, and good afternoon, everybody. So starting with the methodology, a total of 91 samples spanning diesel, gasoline, and kerosene were collected in 2019. Official fuel samples were collected from filling stations or petrol stations in Rivers and Bayelsa states. Now, this was a target area because the previous focus of our research into the unofficial fuel production, also known as the artisanal oil industry, was done across these two states. But also because these are often considered the core Niger Delta states with a majority of onshore oil and gas production. We also collected control samples from Lagos. This was to compare with the official samples available in the Niger Delta, as official fuel supplies, are allegedly blended sometimes. And it was assumed that the fuels that are available in Lagos would be so close to import that they would not be adulterated. All of the samples were collected from major market of filling stations, such as Owando and Total, as well as NNPC, which is the national oil company. This was to reduce the likelihood of samples being blended again, or collecting samples that are purely unofficial samples being sold as official samples, which again is allegedly quite common. And the risk of this would be increased if we were sampling from minor marketers. So our unofficial fuel samples were collected again from Rivers and Bayelsa states. Again, because this was the focus of the previous research, and also because the production of this is prolific in these states. Now, in most cases, the samples were collected directly from an artisanal refinery site, and where this was not possible, from a refiner who had carried those samples from their site to come and meet the researcher. And this was to avoid any blending with official product, which is really common. This is done to boost performance or to mask the origin of the unofficial fuel. So a range of different fuel parameters were tested in a qualified lab in Port Harcourt. include sulfur, polycyclic, aromatic hydrocarbons, and total petroleum hydrocarbons, and lots of other parameters. And these lab results were then interpreted in London, and a final report was peer-reviewed by several research and industry experts. So moving on to the key findings. First, both official and unofficial fuels were of low quality in terms of sulfur content and viscosity. Sulfur is a major contributor to particulate matter pollution, so it should really be a cause for concern. The official is often worse quality than the unofficial, which is a staggering finding when you consider the rudimentary refineries that are producing these unofficial fuels, like we had in some of the pictures in the previous slide. In spite of the fact that Nigeria is exporting high quality, low sulfur crude oil, it's importing low quality, high sulfur refined fuel in return. This is kind of symbolic of the injustices of the extractive industries in the Niger Delta. And from our emissions modeling, poor quality fuel is likely to be a major contributor to air pollution in the Niger Delta, including the soot problem in Port Harcourt, River State, and more widely in Nigerian cities. On top of the aging vehicles on the road that are consuming this fuel, we should remember that Nigeria has one of the worst electricity systems in the world. And the majority of people, therefore, have to rely on private diesel or gasoline generators for power on a daily basis. So, the consumption of this fuel is very, very high. So to get into the specifics of the findings, one of the key findings is that the fuel compositions are below the international benchmark standards. A high viscosity is observed across all the fuels, official and unofficial, which means they are poor performing and damaging to engines. Specifically, if we look at the average of each of the fuel types, starting with diesel, both the official and unofficial were highly viscous. We can see on the graph below, which compares the results to ALS benchmarks. Now, ALS is a lab with internationally recognized standards published. These are shown in the bottom 3 bars on the graph. The top bars surrounded by dotted lines show the samples tested. The top one surrounded by a red line, that's the unofficial samples. The second in black, that's the official sample. So one of the main things to look at on this graph is the blue bar, which shows the grouping of short chain hydrocarbons. You can see that the ones for the samples tested are significantly shorter than the ALS benchmarks. So in essence, there's less fuel in the fuel and more useless long chain hydrocarbons that cannot be completely combusted by these engines and negatively affect the performance. Interestingly, although the unofficial diesel is more viscous than the official diesel, more thick, this is actually preferred locally because it's perceived to last longer. And as the primary use of diesel is in trucks and large generators that need to run for a long time period, it can be seen as cost effective. So moving on to gasoline, here the samples are generally better for both official and unofficial, as in they're more closely aligned with the ALS benchmarks. And we actually see here that the unofficial samples, those refined by the artisanal process, tended to be of better quality than the official samples. And, this is actually in line with consumer preferences and competence of producers locally, meaning for unofficial fuel, out of all the 3 fuel types available on the market, the gasoline is viewed to be the most reliable by consumers. And the producers of this fuel also boast that they can produce very good quality gasoline in comparison to other fuels in our interviews with these guys. So this actually looks like it's backed up by the results of this test. And the final type of fuel that we tested was kerosene. The official with a much better quality than unofficial here, which kind of indicates that the local refiners have trouble producing kerosene. But as kerosene is generally in short supply locally and across Nigeria, but in very high demand. Consumers can tolerate the lower quality of fuels because they're more readily available. Yeah. Furthermore, this fuel is used predominantly in lanterns for lighting or stoves for cooking. So the use is rudimentary too, and the appliances don't discriminate against poor quality fuel. Our next major finding was the sulfur content of these fuels. It was very, very high across all samples and fuel types. The official fuels were often higher than the unofficial fuels. These levels far exceed approved Nigerian standards. We can see on the graph that all the samples are way above the dotted line across the bottom. It's around the 150 parts per million mark, which is the standard in Nigeria for gasoline and kerosene, which itself is high compared to global standards. With these such high sulfur levels recorded in these fuels, importers are clearly exploiting the weak enforcement of regulation in Nigeria. Standards were formally adopted by the Standards Organization of Nigeria in 2017, and these can be seen in the second column. So 50 parts per million for diesel, 150 for gasoline and kerosene. As mentioned, this is high compared to global standards. If we look at diesel, for example, the standard is 50 ppm, while the EU standard is 10 ppm in the third column. The average sulfur content in the official diesel supplies collected from the filling stations was 2,044 ppm, which is 41 times over the Nigerian limit and 204 times the EU limit. In comparison, if we look at the second to last column, the average sulfur content in the unofficial diesel was still very high at 1,523 parts per million. It's high, but it's less than the official diesel. It's at around 30 times the standard in Nigeria and 152 times standard in the EU. So all the sulfur levels are well above the levels of standards, and also above the levels that modern vehicles require for the emissions abatement technologies to work, which I believe is around the EU standard. And as we know that high sulfur fuel contributes to particulate matter pollution, which is particularly damaging to health and the environment, it really needs to be tightly regulated, and it's not happening in Nigeria, these results indicate. So what do we do with these results? We decided to do some emissions modeling. As mentioned by Calvin, Port Harcourt has a particularly visible soot problem that's been there for a few years now, visibly there, but probably there for longer than that. So we modeled the potential impact of producing and consuming these fuels on air pollution. Now, a detailed explanation of both the methods that we used is outlined in the annexes of the full report. But broadly, the first approach used the US Environmental Protection Agency's webfire emission factors across a broad range of engines to calculate total emissions. So, for example, how much carbon monoxide is created from a 1.8 liter gasoline engine, multiplied by an estimate of the number of these engines, and so on, to build up the full picture of emissions. The second approach, built on an empirical correlation outlined in a research paper, focused on the potential emissions impact of high sulfur fuel in relation to the use of diesel generators. Now, we acknowledge that diesel represents a small fraction of fuel use across the city, but the established method, the results of that method, highlight the impact of consuming high sulfur fuels. So the results of the model estimates that unofficial fuel production and consumption produces 40% of the total particulate matter at PM2.5 and PM10 in the Port Harcourt area. When the official fuel consumption is added, this comes to 50%. Here, it's important to note that unofficial fuel contributes significantly more in our model. Firstly, because it includes an estimate of the emissions of producing the fuel, So at the refining site, it's often powered by burning crude oil to heat up the refining pot, which obviously releases a lot of emissions, and we included this in the calculation here on the unofficial side. And secondly, in the model, we put the consumption levels for unofficial fuels at double that of the official fuel. This might seem drastic, but it's based on local reports and research which find that the sale and consumption of unofficial fuels is very, very widespread. And it's not just in the Niger Delta states that we see this problem. We also observe that it's transitioning into other states too. So, but because the official fuel is higher in sulfur, if, for example, we switch all unofficial diesel use to official diesel use, the total emissions will only increase. And to do this, it goes up by 13%, which poses a real challenge to the authorities and policymakers. So therefore, an estimated 50% of air pollution comes from other sources. Some examples include burning of waste, such as biomass for fuel or land clearing, also to dispose of refuse, which is typically high in plastic, or from the formal oil industry. There's a refinery in Port Harcourt, gas flaring, there's a petrochemical plant, also lots of asphalt plants which use bitumen, which is very toxic. The causes are many. So the estimated impact of reducing sulfur concentration in diesel alone to improve Nigerian standards results in a reduction of particulate emissions by a multiple of 5. The model therefore illustrates significant gains that can be made by enforcing sulfur standards across all fuel types. Moving on to the health impact of this, these are becoming more and more understood worldwide, that air pollution is a real issue affecting human health. So the World Health Organization says that particulate pollution is the leading cause of death worldwide. And that's the world's largest single environmental health risk. A 2016 study found that it's estimated to contribute towards 7 million premature deaths a year. And then a few years later, another study found that it's the main cause of death for children under the age of 15. A 2016 study found that Onitsha, which is also in Nigeria, is the world's most polluted city in terms of PM10. But if we look at some secondary sources on air pollution in Port Harcourt, we see that PM 2.5 and PM10 levels are triple those found in Accra, Ghana, and higher than in Delhi in India, which is renowned for being a very dirty city. So Port Harcourt really appears to be one of the most polluted cities in the world. But in the absence of publicly available air quality data, it's really difficult to measure and publicize this. So yeah, this kind of particulate matter pollution is associated with high cases of cancers, cardiovascular and pulmonary diseases, and likely to increase instances of respiratory infection. There's already been a study linking high air pollution to far higher COVID-19. And it's not to take advantage of the global focus on COVID-19 and overplay this connection. But anybody living in Port Harcourt will tell you that they're inhaling visibly high amounts of particulate matter on a daily basis. If you blow your nose, you'll see some black residue on the tissue. There's no doubt increasing vulnerability of residents to catch COVID-19 and to catch other associated illnesses, such as pneumonia, that can heighten your risk of death. So to conclude, the official fuels are of low quality with very high sulfur content. The unofficial fuels, in many cases, are better than official fuels. Nigeria is exporting high quality crude oil, very low sulfur content, and importing low quality fuels with very high sulfur content. And importers are knowingly exploiting a lack of regulation enforcement in Nigeria. The Standards Organization of Nigeria has adopted standards, but these are not being enforced at the point of import. The findings here reinforce those of Public Eye in 2016, They released a report called Dirty Diesel. They found that fuels are keenly blended based on the sulfur standards of the country of destination across West Africa, or what they called Nigeria spec. Public Eye's report is very detailed. It spans a number of West African countries. At the time, it had a lot of publicity and led to further international investigations, including one by the Dutch government. It also led to pledges by different West African countries to adopt new fuels. While this research was not as wide-ranging as that, sadly, it indicates that not much has changed in Nigeria since the study was done 5 years ago. So another conclusion is that a lack of action. It can be argued that a lack of action on fuel quality may be incentivizing consumption and production of unofficial fuel. As a range of consumers report, they prefer using unofficial fuels because they perform better or last longer. And this research finds that they pollute less. The poor quality of imported official fuels can be pushing consumers towards unofficial fuels. As stated earlier, this provides a conundrum for policymakers who at the same time must reduce the unofficial production of fuels because it's illegal and it has a number of negative consequences. But at the same time, they cannot rely on official fuel quality or supply. Finally, the conclusion point on the emissions modeling is that unofficial fuel is, whether the production or the consumption of it, is often blamed for air pollution in Port Harcourt. But we think, based on the results of emissions modeling, that this is not the full story. It actually diverts the attention away from addressing the range of causes that make up that 50% of other pollution. And it conveniently defers responsibility to one single target, those working in the artisanal oil industry. So to finish on the recommendations from the report, recommend the federal government enforces the approved standards in Nigeria. It plans to lower regulated levels in the future. Now, as I mentioned, it's tricky to do this and not disrupt supply during a time that Nigeria is removing the subsidy paid to importers of fuel. But with an oil price collapse and knock-on effect reducing the price of fuels, now's a good opportunity to reset this relationship. And the standard in these approved standards, that's ppm for diesel, 150 for gasoline and kerosene, it's still too high. We already said that a lot of emissions abatement technologies can't even function at this level. So there should be a plan to phase in lower standards. Ideally, this should be part of the agreed ECOWAS roadmap for improving fuel and vehicle emissions from 2021. Another recommendation is to commission a joint investigation into official fuel supplied across Nigeria. An independent federal government agency can work with NNPC, standards organization, and others. And should unacceptable levels be found, you've got to hold those violators to account. Another recommendation is to develop renewable energy infrastructure across the Niger Delta to reduce the demand for fossil fuels, either imported or produced at local artisanal refineries. Energy poverty is really acute in riverine and rural areas where the artisanal refining practice proliferates. So these should really be the target of any kind of rollout of this kind of project. And final recommendation is that the federal government should consider engaging artisanal refiners producing this unofficial fuel in plans for domestic refining, given that they're often producing fuels with better characteristics than official fuels imported to Nigeria. The federal government has made various promises to build modular refineries in the Niger Delta, but it's encountering all kinds of difficulties. But by including the producers of this unofficial fuel in processes of engineering locally appropriate technologies that are cheaper and use local materials, could yield really productive results. And practically, this can be supported by the Petroleum Technology Development Fund, that's PTDF. Okay, so just to end on the next steps, what we at the end intend to do with this research. First, we've got the public launch of this report following the webinar. It's going to be emailed to all of you that have registered to the email address that you used to register, uploaded to the website as well. We're also working with the Center for Human Rights and Democracy on air pollution monitoring, data collection in Port Harcourt. We have some monitors dotted around that will be collecting data, and hopefully this will give us more insight into the levels and the sources of air pollution. We will also start discussions on recommendations from the report with the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs, and oil majors and major marketers in Nigeria. In reality, it may be easier to regulate what's coming into Nigeria rather than on what is being exported by commodity traders from refining countries. And finally, we certainly want to join efforts to pressure ECOWAS to formally adopt a comprehensive set of regulations for introducing cleaner fuels and vehicles across West Africa. And this was agreed in principle by ECOWAS members in February this year, but they were set to confirm this in June 2020. I know that many on this call may have been involved in the ECOWAS process for many years. So I'd like to urge other people on this call to get behind them to ensure that the current COVID challenges don't stop this meeting from happening and this important set of regulations from being formally adopted at what I think is a Council of Ministers meeting in June and from becoming legally binding in January 2021. So at this stage, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you all for listening. I hope it's been insightful, and yeah, I'll hand it back over to Calvin for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Alex. So as I said, officially the webinar will go on till 3 p.m, so another 30 minutes, but we'll be able to stay on the call for longer if we still have questions coming in. So just to say, yes, we've already had some questions coming into the chat box, so please, if you have questions, put them in there. We're not going to take verbal questions just now, just because we have so many participants on the call. It will hopefully be easier to manage it, just getting your questions into the chat box. So anything you do have, please send it through. Alex, so let's start off with, there was a simple question I can answer. Would the slides be shared with participants, please? I think that we can do that. We're sharing this on YouTube anyway, so in one form or another, it will be available. But I'll speak to Daniel, our communications officer, and see if we can send the slides around as well when we're sharing the report with everyone. Alex, maybe this is, I don't know whether you might be able to answer this one, but the first question we got was from Tunde Bello, who's working on the Stop the Soot campaign, of course. He's been talking about the challenges of accessing kerosene and the concern being raised that unofficial kerosene is of poor quality and the struggle to get access to official kerosene. So he says he'd like to know if we know of a reason why official kerosene sales in the city why it's such a struggle to access it at fuel stations. I don't know if you have any answer to that one, to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, I think if you know, other people that are on this call from other parts of Nigeria may have observed as well that it's really a national challenge getting kerosene. So it seems to be an importation issue. And as I said in the presentation, you know, the use of this fuel, which has a very wide range of uses, including fueling jet engines, is really rudimentary. So you're looking to get a very high-end fuel and using it for very low-end prices. So I imagine there are challenges for importers when they can export to more desirable markets and sell this fuel.
Well, thank you.
But I'm sure there are others on this call that are far more qualified to answer that.
Sure. So if anyone has anything, feel free to put that as a response in the chat box as well, please. From Cassie Wodu, asking whether our findings in Port Harcourt regarding particulate matter also mirror the same in Yenagoa. So we only looked at Port Harcourt for this research. I know you asked also, though, did the research team find official filling stations selling unofficial fuel? Alex, would you like to give some thoughts on that?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the methodology, we try to avoid the minor marketers. These privately owned filling stations. We find in a lot of cases, people that are involved in the artisanal oil industry have diversified into the point of sales. So that means they're setting up their own filling stations, either to supply solely their fuel that they're refining in the creeks, or supplying that fuel to other people with filling stations who are then blending it with official fuel to mask it and to sell. So I think 100% there are filling stations selling this fuel, whether purely or whether mixed with other fuel. Um, we try to avoid that by sticking with the um, major marketers who are less likely to do this.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, that was another reason that we took some samples in Lagos, and to try and be sure that the official samples we were taking in the Niger Delta weren't being blended with unofficial products. From Charles Fineface, we have a good question here about the quality of petroleum motor spirit in Bielsa and rivers. Did we spot any differences in the quality between those, Alex?
Mm. Those produced by the refineries.
And yes, because Fineface is making the point about, to his knowledge, the cartels often will claim that their quality of fuel is better. So I think specifically the question is about unofficial fuels coming from refineries, artisanal refineries in the Niger Delta.
Right. I think what we saw was that the fuels, gas, if talking of PMS, that's gasoline, those that were produced in Bielsa were of better quality. And this is interesting because our previous research finds that the refineries in Bielsa are much larger scale. The ovens that they put the crude into and the volume of output is much, much higher. So than in River State, where it seems to be, generally more of a cottage industry, but there are some larger camps too. So, you know, at the same time as that, there's also a greater knowledge sharing in Bielsa. It seems the networks are more collaborative. So, it implies that if you have greater collaboration, then you can share information better, share the technologies, and produce better qualities of fuel.
Great, thank you very much. Kingsley Adindu has mentioned here that apparently the diesel fuel and kerosene imported into Nigeria from official sources are refined from high carbon or maybe high sulfur crude and oil, which is different from Nigeria's crude oil. I would say that's likely to of course be the case. The Tunde Bello again has mentioned, our recommendation of expanding access to renewable energy in the Niger Delta. Is this something we are recommending specifically for the Niger Delta, or is it a national policy recommendation? I mean, I'll give my very quick thoughts on this. So if you want to add anything, Alex. Obviously, when we've written this report, we've been thinking about the specific problems in the Niger Delta. I think SDN as an organization would, of course, say that it would be a positive thing if Nigeria was looking to roll out and increase access to renewable energy across the country. So whilst we've very much posed this as looking at the Niger Delta, because that's been the focus of our report, we would, of course, advocate for that nationally. Do you want to say anything more on that, Alex, or shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah, please feel free to move on. I agree with what you said.
Sure. Kingsley mentions here, so we mentioned that we've just started doing some air pollution monitoring with the Centre for Environment, Human Rights and Democracy in Port Harcourt, also based in Port Harcourt. Are we going to visualize that information in a map so that we can know the hotspots? Maybe this is an opportunity, Alex, to give what preliminarily the data appears to be showing. Are you still there, Alex?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yeah. Do you want? Yeah.
I can pull that up. Yeah, I don't know if
I don't think you necessarily need to show it on the screen, but I think you could maybe just very quickly highlight what it's saying. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'd suggest Chris Newsom, if he's still with us, maybe
Okay.
he's better positioned to talk on this than me.
Sure. So we will need to, if I'll just try and unmute Chris here.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go for it, Chris.
Okay, so first of all, I don't want to go sort of stealing the thunder of our friends at Centre for Environment, Human Rights and Development on this. It's still early days, so there are monitors, and first to answer the question in terms of mapping, that what we've got initially, or rather CERD has initially, is some monitors spread across different parts of Port Harcourt. And that's important because some are exposed to quite different sources. At this stage, I'd just flag three things. One, it's an unusually good opportunity in research terms. We shouldn't be, because of the COVID-19 lockdowns, there's an establishment for a chance for baseline data to be established that you wouldn't get under any other circumstances. Then the second thing, unfortunately, I haven't got all the numbers in front of me, but what's coming out from the early research is numbers for PM2.5 and PM10, which are really shocking when you look at the highest levels. So spikes that are well over 200 for PM2.5, and if my memory serves me right, spikes that are over 400 for PM10. Now, for those of you who don't live on that sort of data day to day, the World Health Standard for PM2.5 is 30. There's actually no safe limit for it, and this reflects a point where even with some of the limited activity we've got going on at the moment, we're still hitting some really high numbers on bad days. So it's a case of sort of watch this space, and also to encourage everyone that has data to find a way to share more, because it's obviously a problem, and we're looking forward to that research contributing to that question of sort of balancing the to what's contributing to these levels of air pollution.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'll pop you back on mute if that's okay.
Sure, that's fine.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me just pull up the questions here again. So, Alex, I know obviously this was not, our research was not able to specifically follow up on this particular issue, but Nicholas asks, who are the major players in importing official fuel into Nigeria, and does it link with the absence of regulation? So can you answer that to the best extent that you can?
Okay, sure. Yeah, very briefly, I think that the importers, those that are given the licenses to import, are published regularly by NNPC. I'd have to check that. But a very good reference point on this is the Public Eye report that was mentioned, 2016, Dirty Diesel. Now, Public Eye is a Swiss-based NGO, so they were, very focused on the commodity traders that are often based in Switzerland. So they saw the likes of Glencore and Vitol and the supplier of Owando as well, are real kind of culprits in this. But like I said, I think that those importer licenses are published, but I have to get back on that.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you, Alex. We've got a series of questions from Sam here that I'm just gonna go through one by one. So some interesting points and questions here. The first is that fuels used in Port Harcourt are not too different to those used elsewhere in Nigeria. And so saying that, the major marketers in Lagos are the same as in Port Harcourt. If this is the case, then there should be soot everywhere in Nigeria because the unofficial fuel is sold everywhere in Nigeria. So I think this is a very relevant point. Obviously, what our research shows is that the fuel consumption and the existence of the artisanal industry in and around Port Harcourt is a major contributor to particulate pollution, but not the only one, but all the same is a major contributor according to our modelling. So, but we haven't concluded, what the reason is definitively for such an extreme problem in Port Harcourt. So we've only got part of the answer there, and I think what you said is very relevant. I don't know if you want to say anything more on that, Alex.
Yeah, and maybe Seth will have some points as well. But like I referenced in the presentation, Onitsha has been noted as the dirtiest city in the world back in 2016. I've also seen WHO reports that have other cities like Kano, Mahia, Aba down as being very, very high. And I guess what that shows maybe is that there's a problem in collection of this data. A lot of data collection on air quality in Nigeria at the moment is based on private users uploading their own data. But as more comprehensive studies like the one by WHO find that other cities are actually terribly, terribly toxic, just that data is not there.
Sure, thank you. And just sticking with some of the comments that Sam's made, he pointed out that UNEP have raised concerns over laboratories and their testing in the Niger Delta. And so just asking if there's a reason that we didn't send the samples testing for testing abroad to check the accuracy of the analysis, and I'll briefly come back on that myself. Well, one major reason for us was resources, and we did not have the funds to be able to send these abroad. And yes, we know there are some challenges with labs in Port Harcourt, but we did just use the one lab, and so while there could theoretically be some issues with accuracy, certainly when we look at the findings and that we're consistently finding, for example, higher levels of sulfur in official fuels compared to unofficials, we can be quite confident that in those findings. Do you want to say anything more about that, Alex?
No, I think that's pretty much covered, and we definitely pointed out this limitation in the full version of the report.
Sure.
But yeah, it's challenging, to get samples abroad, especially when they're, produced in the creeks by these refineries.
Yeah. So then the final one from Sam here is a good question. So did any part of the research touch on the Port Harcourt refinery, just to know if any portion of the official fuel came from that refinery? And also any touch on the countries where Nigeria imported the sulfur-laden fuel from. So do you want to take a go at both of those, Alex?
Okay, sure. Yeah. No, we didn't collect directly from the refinery in Nigeria, but that would definitely be very, very interesting. We looked at NNPC fuels, which are largely claimed to be from the 4 Nigerian refineries, but it could be from any one of those, or it could even be imported. And there are lots of allegations about the fuels that do come out of that refinery in Port Harcourt too, that they are, the trucks are often stocking up with the unofficial products. So it'd be very challenging to really get that source fuel, but it's definitely something that'd be interesting to test in the future. And then again, on the second part of the question, the importation of this fuel, it was really outside the scope of this, and I haven't really looked at this separately, so I'm afraid I can't answer that.
Sure. And I think we know generally, though, that there are major refineries in the Netherlands and Belgium, where quite a bit of fuel comes from. Also India, but certainly it was beyond the scope of our research to be able to definitively say where these fuels are coming from. and so it's not possible for us to say here. I'll just come back to a point that was asked about kerosene and the lack of availability. There's been a couple of helpful comments from participants, so thank you for those, saying that kerosene is deregulated, unlike petroleum motor spirit and diesel. So the subsidy on those products serve as an incentive, and also, marketers do not see the trading of kerosene as particularly lucrative. So those sound like important reasons why kerosene is less available. Official kerosene is less available in the market. A couple of questions here, Alex, from Timmy, who says, did the research identify the country or countries of origin of this dirty fuel? Oh, sorry, we've gone through that one. And did the research determine if such bad quality imported fuel is specifically refined for export to Nigeria? And so I think we've touched on that, but do you want to go back on that, Alex?
Yeah, just to say that it does reinforce those findings of the Public Eye report that did a lot of research around the refineries in Europe and the exporters, and it kind of shows that they're refining this fuel based on the standards of the country that they're exporting to. So very high sulfur fuels, refined especially in that way, knowing that they have agreements with countries that they can import them to.
Thank you, Alex. And just a comment here from Anij, who I know, I believe, worked in the past with Public Eye on their report on West Africa, noting that a critical entry point with government is to be following up on the existing standards that have been put forward of 50 ppm for diesel, sulfur in diesel, organised by UNEP in December 2016, and yes, we fully agree with that. From Dr. P. Ogon, sorry, he has asked, he's noted that illegal refining is known to be common across rivers, Bielsa and Delta. Do we know of any reason why states, well, Bielsa and Delta, are not having noticeable soot pollution? I think this might come back to some of the things that we've already said, Alex, but do you want to comment on that?
Sure, and Chris is unmuted here as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, which one? You've got me back on again?
Yes.
So just hit me on the contribution, but just quickly to say to wind back to one question before on the why don't we see more soot nationally. I think to underline your point about the lack of data, and also that there's one key thing to keep in mind. Soot is visible, and that means that it's either one of two things. It's either so much particulate matter that it's clumped together and you can see it, or it's larger particles that go along with all the smaller ones. So one of the simple issues is that you may well have far higher PM numbers in other parts of the country and people don't realize. Lastly, a question of geography. So if we take Lagos, for example, one of the biggest areas urban-wise, but very coastal, some of the most dense parts of Lagos, breezier than average, and so it's got some natural protections. That's not to be casual about the situation, but whenever you're measuring these things, there's quite a few factors in play. Alex, you might need to bring me back to the thing that we're tag teaming on.
No, I think that was exactly the question, but they were specifically asking about Delta and Bielsa states.
Okay, so two insights just to add. So first of all, I don't keep very good track of this simply because we don't have insider information, but you do get to see what's going on with the smokestacks. So my understanding is that the Port Harcourt refinery, which by the way has often been accused as being a significant source of soot and air pollution itself, wasn't operational during the period of this research and hasn't been operational for quite some time. noticeably also by coincidence, we've had some drop-off in overall soot pollution, going from calamitous to very, very, very bad. Then in Delta and Bielsa, what I'd say is that generally we're talking about two things. One, a lack of measurement, and two, smaller urban areas. The other thing I'd say that distinguishes Port Harcourt is that we've got plenty of allegations in terms of refineries being closer to Port Harcourt than you might see in the other states. And finally, a few atmospheric things that are an issue which we won't be able to go into today, but distinguish what may be happening in the States. Last but not least is a very anecdotal thing, which our Delta friends might be able to chip in on. They have complained quite vigorously at times when the Warri refinery has kicked in, and have described in graphic terms a situation very similar to that in Port Harcourt.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I think just to add, like this air pollution issue is clearly very, very serious, but it's something that we're piecing together, and there are a lot of interesting variables at the moment going on. So
yeah,
hopefully people, hopefully we'll be able to come back to people and have a discussion specifically on this in the future.
Absolutely, and I mean the thing is that what we've got in front of our nose here is something that is measurable, has a track record internationally in terms of what happens when you have fuel of this sort of standard and you use it. And I think it's that the part of the discussion is that simple.
Thank you very much, both. So we're getting close to 3, but we're going to continue because we've still had questions coming in, and we'll probably try and run to sort of 10 past, 3. So if you can stay on the call and want to stay on, please do. We've had loads of comments come in. I've got quite a lot to scroll through, so my apologies if I do miss anyone's question or comment, but as I said, feel free to contact us after the webinar as well, and we're more than happy to receive your questions and get back in contact with you. But we'll go over time a bit because we've still got quite a few questions coming in. Firstly, just noted from Kingsley saying that you have a recent GIS map, and would be willing to share that with us, looking at points of vandalism and so on. We'd be very happy to receive that. That would be fantastic. So yeah, very much open to receiving more information from others that can help us to further this research and work. Absolutely. I wonder, this might be a question also that I might try and bring Matt Halstead in on, who's from Noctis and helped us with this work, and put to both of him and Alex from Robin Cartwright, that he understands much imported fuel comes from the oil majors. Is there any evidence that the fuels have been added to or interfered with somewhere in the supply chain? And Matt, not to put you on the spot, but I'll unmute you as well, so that if you have anything you'd like to respond to on this, you can do.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Robin, for the question. To be honest, the scope of the research didn't look into this specifically. In terms of blending, both for unofficial and for official, we undertook testing of the Lagos samples to, having a look at the point of import to see if there's a difference between the import that was received in Lagos and the fuels that were used in Port Harcourt. I think the difficulty is that at the same time, there's also direct imports that come into Port Harcourt. There were certainly instances of higher levels of additives such as manganese, which were unexpected. Now these weren't the highest levels in terms of what was identified in the Dutch inspectorate report, but there were certainly some additives which were different from let's say the Lagos samples. So it's not conclusive at all, and I noted that Joseph Ikie has indicated that previous research has indicated that foul play along the supply line does occur in terms of the quality tampering. Personally, we would like to do some additional analysis into the aspect of blending and see what happens along that supply chain. What was interesting was why, for example, some unofficial sulfur concentrations of fuels in Bielsa at the artisanal refineries had such high sulfur, whilst they were using typically sweet Nigerian crude. Now that could indicate some element of blending, some element of tampering along the supply chain, but at the moment it's inconclusive. But this research did point to certainly some inconsistencies. So thank you for that question. It's really helpful.
Thank you, Matt. This might be to Alex or Chris or Matt, so whoever might be best able to answer this. From Eugene Abels, asking, is there established format? So is there a way in which Department of Petroleum Resources or Standard Organization of Nigeria are subjecting imported fuel to quality tests before they are distributed around the country? Do we know much about what process is already in place?
Yeah, okay, so from my research, I try to reach get through to them. But we know very well that the Nigerian ports face all kinds of issues in terms of getting goods through in time, getting goods out.
Sorry, Alex, are you still there? Can you hear us?
Issues of getting fuel kinds, it leads to scarcity and people unable to get the fuel to filling stations. I would say that a lot of these checks are, the customs officials are incentivized to bypass these checks and to just get the fuel through as quick as possible.
Alex.
So from research into this, there's absolutely no evidence of these tests being done.
Okay, I think, sorry, you cut out a bit there, but I think we caught the last bit of you saying there's not clear evidence that these tests are being done, and certainly the fact that we've found fuels with these high levels in it would suggest that may be the case. Thank you for that. So sorry, I'm just going to have to go back into the questions and see what we've got here. Okay, I can see comments here, but I think these are coming back on some of the previous issues discussed. I think Flora has noted that with the recent lockdown, she's noticed a reduced traces of soot. So responding to Dr. Ogun's question later before about is there a reason there appear to be differences between Bielsa rivers and Delta? But I can't see any sort of specific questions here. There's some quite useful additional comments. I wonder, just to open this up to Matt, Chris Newsom, and Alex, whether I'm just going to unmute you all, just to see, have you got any additional comments that you want to make in terms of the issues and questions raised by participants so far?
Matt, do you want to have first crack?
Yeah, sure. I think there was one comment which I've just read from Sam saying about it makes simple logical sense to say that unofficial fuel is low sulfur and high quality in most cases. Personally, from the research, I think it's a difficult claim to make. We did find that whilst unofficial fuels were lower in sulfur than their imported counterparts, they were certainly not anywhere near what you would expect them to be if you were purely refining very, very sweet Nigerian crude, which is strange. I was personally very surprised about that. Unfortunately, both unofficial and official had very high levels of sulfur compared, looking at both unofficial and official. Whilst official was higher, unofficial still is high, and in that case, when you're looking at legal regulation, the regulation of the official sector is certainly an enormous enormous factor of the standardized organization of Nigeria. But then looking at the unofficial fuels as well, why is the sulfur level so high? It's an excellent question and something we need to understand better.
Thanks, Matt. And this might be a good question to you, Chris. So from Barnaby, he said, have we considered using community air monitoring tools to monitor the refineries and their impacts? There's also a couple of good suggestions and links here. Thanks so much for that, Barnaby. We'll definitely follow up on those. But Chris, maybe you can just link that to the work that's being done with CERD at the moment.
So the short answer is yes. And the thing is that if you're using low-cost monitors, you either have the choice of trying to place them somewhere near refineries, and that's a little bit delicate, but certainly not that challenging. These low-cost monitors have little issues in terms of power sources and so on. The second thing is that wherever you place them, they're going to measure pollution from all sources, and air pollution moves around more than you expect and does all sorts of funny things. So you have to be careful about attribution. The last thing I'm going to throw in just as a closing thing is just to reiterate the point from early in the meeting, which is that unless there is resounding data to refute these findings in terms of sulfur, what it points to is the same issue that's been pointed to by other reports, that high sulfur fuels are coming in. The motivation for that, for me, the only explanation is cost. It's cheaper to do. And there's a once in a generation opportunity to bring this to an end, where if Nigeria starts shifting across to cleaner fuels and faces the issues in terms of local refining, you're going to have massive health benefits at pretty minimal cost, because the cost of clean fuel when oil prices are so low compared to dirty fuel, the margins are going to be never going to be smaller.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's a really good point. Okay, I'm just going to address a couple of more questions and comments, and then we will wrap up. And again, apologies if I've missed your question or comment. There's been lots of things going in, so I've done my best to scroll through and check we've captured everything. A reminder that you're more than welcome to send your questions to us afterwards, and you can use the info@stakeholderdemocracy.org email, and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. And that email address has been put into the chat box as well. So the few remaining ones that we've got right now, and we've got a question from Chibuzo about, based on our findings, do we think that artisanal refineries should be legalized? It's a very interesting question. And indeed, I believe from various reports that have been out there, there have been discussions in that kind of direction, even at the federal government level, about how this problem of the artisanal oil industry is to be solved. Certainly, we've seen with the artisanal mining sector that's a direction that's been taken. I don't think SDN has a specific position on this right now. There are obviously major challenges with the artisanal industry in terms of how it's run, and the pollution that results from it, and there are also challenges in terms of the economics of it, because at the moment the input is coming effectively free of charge, but at the same time, this is an industry which has come about through necessity, lack of access to fuel in the Niger Delta, lack of access to jobs, lack of access to energy. So something has to be done to bring about proper social development across the Niger Delta, which provides decent, safe jobs, which provides access to energy, and which sees that communities that have often seen the brunt of the negative impacts of the oil industry and not the benefits of it. So I think that there is the conversation going on there about whether the informal industry should be formalized. There are opportunities there, certainly, and we've said that, you know, maybe we should, in our recommendations, that we should be looking at the fact that you've got some skilled individuals there working with very makeshift refineries, producing a grade of refined products which is better quality than what Nigeria is importing in many cases. So I think we do think that there are serious questions to be asked around that side of things, and what the way forward should be. Alex, do you want to say anything more on that particular question? I know that we could probably have a whole half day discussing that one.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very voluminous topic, but I'd say there's quite a lot of barriers, not least the difference in expectations between people that are working in these artisanal refineries and what the government is kind of pushing forward as its policy solution. In reality, these refineries are going to be very expensive and employ very few people. And, you know, the perception on ground is that the artisanal refineries will be formalized, that they will be giving a license to operate, which is simply not the case. If, you know, the fuels are comparable in certain characteristics, but in others they're way off official fuels and will need some kind of regulation. So I think there's still a very long way to go on that debate, and I think it'd be better for, you know, the government to focus on different options in this area, whether it's looking at gas instead and how it can do modular gas in these regions. It's a lot cheaper to invest in, can still tick the boxes of, you know, improving fuel and power supply, and can potentially employ a lot more people. So for me, that modular refining debate is in some ways a bit of a distraction away from some actually tangible options that could be implemented instead.
Good point, Alex. Thank you. A very quick one from Ebejulia Ruth. Can you use this topic on your radio show? Yes, of course you can. We are keen for this for this information to get out as widely as possible, because we believe it's extremely important that action is taken to improve the qualities of fuels that are available in the Niger Delta and around Nigeria, and by all means, contact us. Our press release is also available on our website, and I believe contact details to get in touch with us should you want to discuss anything further with us on that. From a Kemasit, you have asked, can you get a view on whether we think full deregulation of fuel consumption could help improve fuel standards? So this slightly touches on something that Chris Newsom was just saying. So I wonder, Chris, do you want to just comment on that one?
Okay, so yeah, I think the key thing there is that is what does full deregulation mean? As long as full deregulation means that there is a regulator that focuses on the standards of fuel being uniform and to standard, then full deregulation is probably going to help. The other thing to keep in view is is that as an increase in local refining of one type of it or another that starts, that local refining is going to be using modern equipment, which means it should be producing low sulfur fuel, and it shouldn't need to compete with basically low cost dirty fuel. It's a really simple economic thing. The reason for that is for low sulfur being in the mix, or rather high sulfur being in the mix, is it's cheap. And so there shouldn't be space for someone to come into the market with a fuel that is cheaper and be profiteering off that where everyone else suffers the consequences. I'm hopeful that in Port Harcourt there'll be a particularly strong pickup on this report, because it's a very democratic impact. Air pollution is affecting everyone now. Let me stop there and thank my kind assistants that you probably heard in the background.
Thank you, Chris.
And let you guys roll on.
Yeah, so as I said, we would wrap up by 3:15. So I'll just take a couple of quick things here, because there's a similar issue that's come up from two people asking about, did our research establish any link between operators of local refineries and the political elite, security agencies, and so on? And this research was not looking at that specific area, and so very much looking at the quality of fuel, its impact on emissions, and the likely resulting health impacts in the Niger Delta. So I'm afraid that the research didn't look specifically at that issue. However, you're more than welcome to go to the stakeholderdemocracy.org website, where we have, if you go to our resource page, we have many different research papers. And I can see that Daniel's just put into the chat box a link to our More Money, More Problems research report, which is one of the latest research reports we produced in 2018, looking at the economic dynamics of the industry. So you'll be interested to see that. But I'm mindful that we are almost at 3:15 now. So I just want to say, I'll give Alex an opportunity just to chime in if he has anything last to say before we wrap up. But I want to say thanks so much to you all for coming. It's been fantastic to have such a large turnout for the webinar. Obviously, it's an extremely important issue. As we say, we've talked about a lot of the sort of technical details here about high sulfur content official fuels, and having higher content than unofficial fuels, and so on. All of this information is available in our policy briefing and our research report, which we've already sent some links to, and we'll be sending the research report around. But of course, the most important thing here is the potential environmental and health impacts of these things in the Niger Delta and more broadly in Nigeria. And so, this is an urgent issue and something that needs to be attended to for the good of the public in Nigeria. So, thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar and to find out about this issue. We'll be continuing our work on this, and we welcome collaboration and interactions. So please do get in touch with us if you'd like to discuss this work further. And just to say again, sorry if we haven't answered your question, and by all means, if you have other questions that come up, contact us on that info@stakeholderdemocracy.org email, which you can see on the slide here. It's also in the chat box. And I'll just go back to Alex to see if he has anything to say before we wrap up.
Yeah, thanks. Just to say a big thanks again to Noctis, who helped a lot on the analysis and the construction of these emissions models, which really gave us a solid piece of work to run with. And again, to draw people back to this ECOWAS we hold link. If all the member states of ECOWAS, either the environment minister or petroleum minister, has pledged to adopt this comprehensive set of regulations, so introducing that are outlined in this commitment are better than the standards that are in Nigeria but not enforced. So yeah, let's all do what we can to remain still goes ahead in June as planned, and that these standards become legally binding in January 2021.
Thank you, Alex. So sorry if you didn't all hear that. Alex was chopping in and out. I think you probably caught the gist again at this ECOWAS meeting of ministers, which may be the Minister of Petroleum, Minister of Environment. It's really important that that meeting goes ahead, and that these new proposed standards across the ECOWAS region are approved. So any role that you are able to play in that, if you're already involved in that or have links with the Ministry of Environment and so on, please do so. Yeah, so that's it. We will wrap up here. Thank you so much again for your time and for attending, and we welcome further questions, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Goodbye.